Hello, I'm Dr. Harriet Fraad.
And I'm Juliana Forlano, here with our podcast, Capitalism Hits Home.
This is a show about the intersections of class, race, gender, and so many other things that shape our reality today.
We aim to educate, activate, and hopefully alleviate some of the burdens we all experience living in a capitalist USA.
We hope the program activates you, excites you, and please remember it's brought to you by Democracy at Work.
Our main topic for the show today will be, Harriet, go ahead and tell the people.
Education. And it will be the effect of remote education on increasing the huge chasm between the rich and the poor, and the rich and everyone else, between the races, and between those who are sustaining the society by going to work physically every day, and those who have the luxury of working at home.
We'll also be getting to the headlines in a moment. But right now, we thought we'd briefly share with you one of our things that we do now is how capitalism has hit us in our own homes since this last week. Harriet, what did you experience this week?
Well, this week, I strongly experienced Trump's decision to make money off the pandemic rather than protect us, because a client came all the way up here to see me in Massachusetts. And she kind of surprised me. And I sat with her on the porch, and then I let her go to the bathroom, which freaked out my whole family. You could have killed us. And I was confronted with what the pandemic, out of control, allowed by Trump, has done, which is that it makes every little thing terrifying and life-threatening.
Did she wear a mask?
Yes, so did I, but that, still freaked everybody out. I let her go to the bathroom. That was the biggest problem.
Yeah. Well, my husband, who's a scientist, tries to remind us that the science has moved on. So the way that you catch it is by breathing in and out in an enclosed space with somebody who has it, who's not wearing a mask. So, even though she went to the bathroom, you're probably safe. I'm not a scientist, but that's my general understanding. But you don't really see that reported in the mainstream media very much.
No,
I think there is a reason they want people to stay terrified. That's just my personal take on that. They don't really want you to know exactly that, you're not going to get it by touching a thing and then having the other person touch a thing unless someone has COVID and they sneezed on it within a very small period of time and you stuck it right in your nose. It just doesn't really work that way.
But we're all terrified, and I guess they want us to look to the great leader to relieve us.
Well, let me tell you what happened to me this week. I had to make a choice, because now that we're doing this section, now I see how capitalism is intertwining in every area of life, because I'm always on the lookout for what we should talk about. But I think the one thing I wanted to just point out was I have a friend, and he is also a therapist. So when we talk, we kind of talk in those terms, and there's a lot of really asking how you are doing and meaning it. And his feedback to me was like, you seem anxious, Juliana. I mean, I know there's a lot going on, but you just really seem anxious. And then, as it turns out, he's Canadian, and they're getting $2,000 a month. Plus they have health care. And I'm like, yeah, the anxiety starts at the border between our two nations. I mean, I know y'all are worried about a pandemic too, an economic crash too, but I got $1,200 from the government once over the course of that 8 or 9 months that this has been going on. I mean, he said my anxiety was palpable, and I'm like, yeah. And then when I realized they were still getting $2,000 a month, when I pointed out that he doesn't have to have anxiety because of that, even though he said the thing that people say, like, well, we have very high taxes. I'm like, I'm willing to pay high taxes. I already pay high taxes. Trump is the only guy and his very rich cronies. Yeah. who's not paying high taxes.
Right. That's completely on target because 87% of the nation is having high anxiety, according to the studies. So you're in good company and you're in an all American company here. At
Ugh,
any rate,
I
we're
didn't
also looking.
appreciate his feedback. I'm not going to lie. I'm like, well, if you, anxiety is a normal response to a frightening situation. You know,
That's right.
I felt like I
It's
defended
traumatic
myself
for
there a
all
little
of
bit
us.
with him.
Yeah. Well,
Feel free to post your own Capitalism Hits Home story in the comments section on this video. I'm sure we all have plenty. And Harriet and I really do read the comments, so we're looking forward to hearing from what you have to say. And now, on to the headlines. Harriet, what caught your eye this week in
two
terms of
things
capitalism
caught my
hitting our
eye
homes that were in the news?
particularly. Two things. One is that for the first time since 1975, a private hospital was organized in North Carolina. The nurses all voted or overwhelmingly voted for the National Nurses Association. That's amazing because hundreds of thousands were spent to defeat that union and they won. And these are overwhelmingly women. The two most militant unions now are the um, flight attendants, Sarah Nelson, who will be trying and hopefully succeeding to lead the AFL CIO and change their direction, hopefully, and also the national nurses that have several unions, all of them. Those are the two most militant unions now. And it's very exciting to see. And it's exciting to see that the trajectory of history on labor is shifting. So
Mm.
that was the first one that caught my eye and was really good news. The second
That
one
is
wasn't good
great news.
news.
Wait, Harriet, hold on before you go on. I had Sarah Nelson on my program on
Oh,
Act TV, and I asked her a couple times. I'm trying to push her into running for the AFL CIO position to take over for Richard Trumka. Um, I don't know if you know any news about that. I haven't heard anything, but I'd also be interested in hearing your thoughts about what it would mean to have a female head of a labor organization of that magnitude.
well, there are two females that are running. One of them is the same old thing with a vagina. Okay.
Mm,
I'm not
yes.
into having, Margaret Thatcher as a female triumph since she hurt women more than anyone else in England, or even Hillary Clinton's fake feminism pushing for 1250 when the most workers who get minimum wage are women and need at least $15 an hour, but she's supposed to be a feminist. So I don't want a corporate feminist or a corporate type, even if she's female. My excitement over Sarah Nelson is that she was the only one who called for a general strike when workers had to go back to work unpaid in the airline industry. And of course,
Yeah.
the AFL-CIO didn't go with her, but I think it will be the combination of militancy and feminism is amazing. And I couldn't be happier if she got it.
Ooh, I wonder how I can get in there and get a vote. I'd have to pick up a
We
third
can't.
job.
We can't. Even union members can't. Only certain delegates can. The union members are not asked. I looked it up
So we'll
because I
have to
was
lean
hoping.
on those delegates, I guess.
Yes, yes.
We'll have to squeeze them the old-fashioned way. Harriet, the other story you wanted to bring to light.
The other story is a bad news story. Hunger in the United States has gone up 600%. Kids are coming into clinics with acute malnutrition. And, America throws away 31% of its food because it rots on the store shelves and so on. And so, of course, this problem could be fixed. You don't have to be starving. And yet, 1 in 4 kids has what they call food scarcity, what everybody else knows is hunger. And more than
Yeah, why
more
don't we
than one
call
in
it
four,
hunger anymore?
because it's
You
too
can't deal
graphic
because
and
you
it's
can't
too,
emotionally deal with a hungry kid. It throws you off. But
that's right.
if you whitewash the term so it sounds academic and not something that hits you right in the gut,
Right.
hunger versus
Hunger
food
hits you.
scarcity. Interesting.
Yeah. And so that what we have on top of everything else, the maleducated or non-educated children and children who are home alone all day, and is no food. And we already have the poorest children of any of the wealthy nations. And now we have the hungriest too. 600%
Harriet,
food pantries are running out.
I used to be part of a food co-op, the old one, Park Slope Food Co-op in Brooklyn. And it was worker run. And several of the jobs were, getting the sort of food that was just about to turn, cutting off the parts that have turned bad, and delivering on the daily basis the parts that were still good. Although we should give food that is healthy and
Right.
fresh
And fresh.
to people who are hungry too. But getting that right over to the food bank that would then cook it up and serve it out that evening, I don't really get the purpose of not doing that. Why don't other, why I guess I get it because it's capitalism. They really just don't care. It's easier to throw it in a dumpster than it is to have somebody pick it up. But do you know about what would the mechanism be to feed these kids?
Well, it would be either federal funding and food kitchens set up across the areas the way they used to have school buses delivering the school lunch when kids had nothing to eat. That's one thing that school districts are volunteering to do, but isn't required. Or what you could do is have it go to big central kitchens and people be able to pick up meals and take them home. Look, you already have a cheap, ready network of what should be public restaurants. All those McDonald's, all those Burger Kings and Wendy's that have little playgrounds, and that's where the food should be delivered and given free because they have the mechanism to serve it. And
How about
so
those
it's
restaurants that are all closing? Can't they be used for something?
absolutely, or the butcher shops that are closing and therefore throwing out their food. Part of the reason that stores do send things to food banks is they get a big tax write off. They exaggerate the value and get a big tax write off. But those businesses that don't get a big tax write off or where the work is more than the tax write off don't do it because there is no system of helping people to be nourished. Another system, of course, would be to do what every European country is doing, having the government pay 70 to 90% of what someone earns who's out on COVID, and so that they can buy their own food, so that they can continue to live. And then the deal is the government won't do that unless there's an ironclad commitment to hire that worker back as soon as the business opens. Then it means that their economy isn't shutting down. Unemployment is 1% greater than it was before the pandemic in Germany and less than that in France. It means that people are employed. It means that people know that they'll have a job. It means that they have money to buy their own food and they don't have to go
Less
to food
terror.
banks. Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
It's
less terror. And then we all know that when people are frightened, they often look for a strong man to lead, who's going to promise that he's going to lead them out of whatever they're going to make America great again, to use a current
that's right.
example.
That's right. Some stable
Harriet,
genius
do
will
you have
come
any
along.
idea how the racial breakdown is of the hunger that's happening in the United
Well,
States?
it's overwhelmingly poor, and poor equals Black, Brown, and Native American. The poorest, the greatest hunger is in Native American communities, which are the poorest Americans. They're the only Americans who weren't refugees, but whatever, they're the poorest or immigrants.
Wow.
And Black, Latinx, and Native Americans are suffering greatly, much more than whites, because whites tend to have more money. Poor whites are
What
also
do you think
suffering.
people who are watching could do right now to be useful in this area? Do you think lobbying the government? I mean, Trump seems like he loves giving tax cuts. Why wouldn't he give a tax cut to, people for the food that why? I'm sure the grocery store union could lobby if there is one, or I
Of
guess the
course they
grocery store
could. And
lobby
what
could lobby.
people could organize to elect progressives and not let the election be stolen, because that's the only a change that doesn't have the priorities of serving only the rich would be a huge improvement for everyone in terms of our quality of life together, and for the mass of people who are dispossessed now, and for all of those people, those 1 in 4 children who are hungry. It's
So
outrageous.
you would encourage people who, even think that Joe Biden is a stooge to vote for Joe, and or people who have
Absolutely.
lost hope in the electoral process. They don't see a candidate on the slate that actually represents them as a true progressive. You believe that it's important that they go out and vote anyway in this particular election?
Yes, I totally believe it's important to go out and vote for Joseph Biden, not because it's Biden, but because it's not Trump. And because as soon as he's elected, if he is, we can get out there and march and make change. Otherwise, we'll get out there and be shot by Trump or the thugs that he encourages. So
Well
it's a
said.
very important decision to vote for Biden.
Unfortunately, that was very well said, and scary.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
is. We're
Well,
anxious.
I'm glad we had a chance to kind of talk about that story at length. So I'm just going to I have a couple, but I'm just going to present the one that is actually, I would consider it a piece of good news based on some terrible news, but a piece of good news here is that, so several countries, these leaders are promising to overturn their environmental degradation and put nature on a path to recovery within a decade. This is very
Wow.
important that when you say within a decade, I had a friend of mine who, I forget which one of my activist friends said, if they say it's more than a decade, that means they're just kicking the problem down the road. If they say they're going to do the whole recovery within a decade, then that's an actual promise. But the 65 leaders include Angela Merkel, Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Hope I'm pronouncing that properly. They wrote, there's a UN biodiversity summit this week in New York City. They wrote, "We are in a state of planetary emergency. We commit ourselves not simply to words, but to meaningful action and mutual accountabilities." Um, what they're looking to do is eliminate plastic leakage to the oceans by 2050. I'm hoping that means they eliminate the use of plastic, because that's
Otherwise,
derived
it'll
from
be the
fossil
ocean.
fuels,
Right.
etc. And they also are seeking to incentivize banks and businesses to value the natural world. They're identifying the unsustainable production and consumption as the key driver of environmental crises that require urgent and immediate global action. And then this story goes on to report the problem that strong men, and they named us as having a strongmen leader. Strongmen are the world's, leading the countries that are the world's biggest polluters: US, China, India, Russia, and Brazil. They would not sign it. So, and those are all guys. I just wanted to point out, strong men. They really need men who are leading these different countries. So, I thought it's good that some leaders are coming together and making commitments and really putting this on the front page of the news. So I thought that was a positive. And then when they said the unsustainable production and consumption, I was the driver. I thought that was wonderful, because what I keep
Yes, it
hearing
is.
reported is, oh no, the mall is closing. Oh, Bed Bath and Beyond is going out of business. It's a terrible thing. And I keep thinking, well, I don't want people to be hungry. I do want people to be employed, and everybody needs towels from Bed Bath and Beyond or wherever. But wouldn't it be nice to shut the mall? I mean, you know what I mean? I don't know. I thought sometimes when I see that those stores are closing, These are stores that I've thought, that was the second store I was going to bring, that 60 Bed Bath & Beyond stores are closing, including the one right down the street here. That it might be kind of a plus. What are your thoughts about that, Harriet?
I think it's great because I think that these palaces of consumption and the whole American ideal that if you can consume and consume and consume, you're a success, has to go. And I disagree that those are strong male governments you mentioned. I think they're weak, insecure males like Trump, and that they overcompensate because they're not strong at all. They're weaklings. If they were strong, they could be nurturing. They could take care of
Well,
their
I think they
people.
meant strong men, like, autocrats,
Military.
etc. Yeah.
Yes, I think they did
They
too.
found one way
Authoritarian.
to
Yeah,
authoritarians.
they're
Yes.
authoritarian governments and authoritarian leaders, like Trump is, not as much as he'd like to be, but as Trump is.
Hopefully
And
not
I
for
think
long.
fewer malls that you have to get to with your fossil fuel car are not a bad thing at all. So I'd much rather
So
see
there we go.
places people can walk to.
We're going to get on to our main story for discussion, as Harriet previewed at the top of the show. But first, you may have noticed that the show is coming on every week now. So we're very excited about that. We pitched coming on every week to Democracy at Work, the organization that is supporting us, because there's so much going on. And we both felt that being able to connect capitalism to what is happening to people is a very important part of the dialogue that we're hoping to bring together, and we're hoping to give some voice to. And the news happens fast, so we wanted to do it every week, and Harriet and I are willing to do that. But of course, it requires resources from the small organization that is Democracy at Work. So they gave us a 90-day window to produce shows every week, asking us that if we could help raise funds. And I'm just kind of putting it all out on the table here for you. I'm not like, oh, if you want to support us, send money, okay. But they basically said, you can go every week if after 90 days you can show an uptick in support, financial support, via the Patreon community. And that is what we're asking you to do now. If you have the money, we understand completely, right, Harriet, that people are in difficult positions, financially, emotionally, everything. But if you have a little bit that you could donate to show the organization that you find this useful, you can go to patreon.com, patreon.com/capitalism hits home. They ask you for like a regular donation. It could be $1 a month, $5. If you're rich, it could be $80 or $5,000, whatever. We're not going to say no to any amount, but we do appreciate if you show that this is, via financial support, that this is something you value. And also, if you cannot do that, we ask that you just share this content with your friends, with your family. We're, of course, trying to obviously grow the audience for this program.
And if you know some very rich people, of course, we will accept huge donations.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. There is a way to do one-time donations. Let me make sure I have it right. I definitely want to have that right. Well, I'll have to get that to you by the end of the program, but I think if you just go to Democracy at Work, you can make a one-time donation, but that doesn't necessarily show that you want to support the Capitalism Hits Home project, and we need to show the organization that people are valuing this particular show. So
Right.
that's the ask. If you can help us, that would be great, as we hope to be of service to you as you watch and listen. Harry, you want to add anything?
Not really. I think you said it all, Juliana, and that we want people to appreciate us, and we want to do what you need. So we want your feedback too. That way we
Yes.
can serve you better.
So on to the longer story today.
Yes.
Harriet, why don't you introduce our topic for today?
Yes. Our topic is that under the guise of the pandemic, Americans are losing the right to a free public education. They long ago lost the right to a free quality public education, but they are losing the right to public education, period. And all divisions between people are getting worse. The gender gap has increased by 10 years as women who both are in the marketplace but still overwhelmingly responsible for children. And we have to remember that at least 1 in 4 parents is a single parent taking care of children. And in places like New York, it's more than a third home with children and having to take time off from work if they can. Otherwise, kids can just be neglected. But taking time off from work, making less money, having no advancement because they're cutting back rather than doing the overtime and extras to show how good they are at work, so that the gender gap will get worse. Women's position relative to men's is worsening, and it already was pretty bad. Um, Women on the whole get about, at least before the pandemic, 82% of what males make, fathers, etc. Fathers still make the same or a little more when they become fathers because employers think, oh, they'll work harder. Working mothers make 69 cents on the dollar, on the male dollar, much less. So that you have all these single mothers who are desperate and who either have to cut back so their children will have some supervision or be even poorer than they are. And the gender gap is widening. Also, there are gaps widening between the possibilities for Black, Latinx, Native American children, and white children, because white children tend to have more money. What's very interesting is what gives a child an edge in life, it turns out from recent research, is not necessarily whether they live in a single family or even so much whether they live in a neighborhood that's prosperous or not, but their access to resources.
Mm.
Now, of course, if you go to a private school, you have access to a lot more resources. You could join the chess club. You could join the school orchestra. You could be on the fencing team that St. Anne's has, a fencing team. You could do all sorts of things after school, get coaching in athletics, get dance and music and art lessons. And so what you have is this huge class ravine in which all those people, what they call Alice, people, which are people who are employed but have no assets and lower incomes.
Oh
They
yeah,
fall
what does that stand for, Alice?
Alice. It's
Asset limited.
income, no asset, and I forget what I
We'll look
remembered
it
it
up.
earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew it earlier. It'll come back to me. But at any rate, it's anyone who doesn't have wealth, independent wealth, or high incomes are getting further and further behind, and class divides are getting steeper.
Oh, so the New York Times was even covering this, under the headline that COVID is putting back, what's happening around COVID and education is setting women back, as you said, at least 10 years in terms of the gender gaps. And some of the research that they quoted was that, based on decades of research, there was one institution that was effective at limiting gender inequality and encouraging women's participation in the workplace. And it was early childhood education, which is very limited and hard to come by right now under COVID.
Terribly hard to come by. Even before, putting one child in a childcare situation so that you can work was equivalent in a year to a tuition for a community college. It's
Tell me
largely
about it.
unaffordable. And there were more quality federal daycares during World War II when they needed women to get out into the munitions factories. And so that they set up an excellent daycare system, which they then closed down at the end of World War II
Yeah,
to
because they didn't need
allow
the
for
people
more
to make war.
jobs for the returning GIs who
Yeah.
were male. At any rate,
Wow.
we,
I got to let
the
that sink
biggest,
in for just a minute. Hold on. That is really something. So they'll provide childcare so you can make weapons of war to go across the sea and kill someone else and their kids. But then
yes,
when you're done killing those kids, you come home and no more childcare. You go right back
exactly.
into your traditional role of childcare.
Right. If you could afford it, you have to remember that over a third of New York City parents and at least a quarter across the country are single parents. So it's not like someone else is helping you to support your child. And they're living in a household with children as a single adult. And so that what you have is
Oh,
instead of, you don't have preschool education, you have kids being left behind at home alone because their parents have to work if they're in retail jobs of any kind. And either that or if they have siblings, the older siblings are taking care of the young children instead of doing their remote schooling. So that you have a more severe cutback in one of the only avenues that allows women to continue in employment.
I want to engage you in this part of this discussion that strikes me as a somewhat new mom. She's already almost 5, but I feel like it just occurred because it occurred late in life. And so it's a shock still. Um, so not to be a doomer, but I moved away from the Rust Belt to find work after taking these enormous school loans for a college education, and I needed a better income than was provided in my home city, which is basically a service industry. And now that the malls are closing, there's no jobs there either. So when I had no family around when I had my young daughter, and it really does seem to take a village to raise a child. And I realized that subsidized childcare is a way to sort of extend that village idea to the whole of society. But there was something about the fact that I guess if you want to go to work, or but you need to
You
go to
have
work in
to.
order to make money. I don't know if let me try to get to the point here. This capitalism has everyone in this every man for themselves mentality. So no one sees their village as your kid is part of it. Everyone sees themselves as their own. There's one mother, 2 kids. There's one family and the kids. And the Darwinianism around it encourages people not to care for the neighbor's child. And this was even before there was concern over a neighbor being a spreader of COVID. There was kind of this concern that your neighbor would take from your generosity and then not be there when you needed help, because everyone's in this sort of dog race. And maybe this is just the New York talk, and the center of
No.
capitalism in our country. But government programs can surely help with that. Um, and it's nice to feel your whole society cares for you via government programs. But it's once removed from the personal caring for one another that I feel like if we had more social, shared prosperity, we would be able to do. I feel like it's a band-aid that society puts on for what capitalism takes away. And in my experience, it's just not enough. It's not enough to say, well, I'm going to give you some childcare so you can get back to the factory. You know what I mean?
Yes. But look, one of the reasons that public education is disappearing for the mass of the American people, for all but those who could afford private education, is that they are, the extras are either achieved for your child through a group effort of wealthy parents who send their kids, or wealthier parents who send their kids to public school and give 1,000 or 2,000 a year to the PTA to sustain things like the school orchestra and the chess club and private music lessons and dance and the theater group and so on. They do that because those PTAs of those prosperous districts are almost equivalent to a private school in terms of their enrichments. And then those parents get very selfish because there's open enrollment, for example, in New York City. And so parents from different districts want to send their children to get these benefits. And those parents who are giving the money say, oh, no, we're going to charge for those extras to keep those, because we don't want those children
Keep out the
to
riffraff.
benefit. And it's a
Yeah.
big struggle in many of the public schools that are better off in New York City between those parents who want to restrict the extras for which they've paid extra and those they haven't. Now, of course, in poor areas, they don't have that at all. They don't have the extras. Plus, those schools have a much higher pupil teacher ratio often and they have more beginning teachers who are inexperienced because an experienced teacher wants a more relaxed environment with more supports and more extras. And so it builds on itself. And now with remote learning, it's building on itself catastrophically.
Mm.
In rural districts, they don't even bother because not enough people get the internet. So they're not even bothering. In some rural districts, they try to send paper materials to people, but it kind of collapses. So you have at least half of Latinx and Black children not getting an education.
Wow.
And you have about a third of white children not getting any education. Why not? Well, it's not like Cuba, where since everyone has a TV during the pandemic, they have the lessons on TV, which the kid can turn on him
Geez,
or
that's a good
herself.
idea.
Of course it is. It's obvious. And so that you have remote learning. About a quarter of the schools haven't given out the tech yet because there was a big call for tech and they ordered it at the last minute. Then you also have immigrant families who can't speak English and don't know what they're talking about on the remote learning. You have a lot of kids whose whose mothers have to work and who therefore, or whose fathers aren't present or have to work. If the grandmother comes to help, she often can't speak English, and if she can't work the computer. There's no one to help if there's a computer glitch, and in many families, they don't have the money to pay for internet. And so they're not the Verizon users. They
So
can't
we
do
have
it.
almost two different issues that we're talking about here. One is just basic childcare, early childcare, which comes
Yeah.
with hopefully high quality childcare, meaning it comes with an educational component. They just don't just plop them in front of Barney. Is Barney still happening?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, something, and let them watch TV all day or with a bunch of plastic toys. And then the actual educational component, where people are falling behind now because of COVID. They were falling behind before, right? As you mentioned.
Yes,
Um,
they were class segregated and they were race segregated before. However, it's taken a quantum leap. And to add insult to injury, Cuomo and Bill Gates want to extend remote learning and close all the school buildings.
wow,
Saves
really?
money for the city? Yes. There's a big initiative. Cuomo's all excited about it. So's Bill Gates, whose other initiatives failed miserably, and who are ignoring what they're doing is taking away public education for the mass of American children. Already
Well, an educated
segregate
populace
class.
is a real problem to fascism.
It is. And already a class segregated school system exists across this nation. Segregated because in private schools, they don't have these problems. Every family gets internet. If the parents aren't working remotely, and they usually are in wealthier households, then the
Yes.
nanny or a tutor or someone else will come over, and they have much more imaginative materials, specially designed and animated. Plus, they have video conferences with each child every day. I have a
Very,
client who's a public school teacher who tries to do that with his kids, but often when he tries to reach them, there's people screaming and fighting in the background. When he goes on the screen, to do FaceTime with them. If they have one of the school dispensed computers, he sees naked people walking around. He hears all sorts of commotion
That's why he
because a
wants to
lot of
do it.
people don't have a quiet space. They don't have the internet properly. They don't have a quiet space for a child to work. They don't know
Harriet,
about computers. It's impossible.
Harriet, back to a point that we made in the beginning about the motherhood gap. In terms of women losing their earning power because mostly of motherhood, not necessarily because of a gender gap. Now that we are under COVID, and what happened to me personally is suddenly everyone had to work from home and there was no childcare, just like what happened to everyone else. So basically, my husband and I had to split the day. Now, we would watch, because he is a wonderful person, where I would watch my daughter in the afternoons and work in the mornings, and he would watch her in the mornings and work in the afternoons. My husband was called unprofessional by his male colleagues because he could only work for 6 hours a day, and then he was working late into the night anyway. And he opted to say no to projects that were not likely to run anyway, like setting up a summer internship program. There's not going to run because of COVID. Not to mention that the other workers in his organization use the opportunity to better and forward themselves and their own personal projects and agendas, instead of understanding that a pandemic affects different people differently, and then shifting focus to complete tasks that were important for the forwarding of the institution itself as a whole. And again, as I reported before, like, I see this sickness, this mental sickness of every man for themselves, thinking that capitalism, I think that capitalism instills it and cultivates it. So God bless him, he started to really live and understand what it is to be a woman in this culture, who gets kind of left behind because somebody has to take the kid to the hospital when they break their leg at school, if they're going to school at all. And it's usually the woman. So I just saw, like, this lack of understanding was so rampant in, I don't want to out his industry, but in an industry that's supposed to be, somewhat enlightened, right?
Yeah,
Your thoughts about that?
there are, which is that when women were volunteering to go or were pushed into the labor force because men could no longer support them in America, work outside the home was added to childcare and domestic labor. The average unemployed man still does less housework than his fully employed housemate.
Oh, yeah,
But
I
part
grew up that way.
because it was considered unmanly to do housework and childcare. In fact, one of my favorite books is called Porn for Women. And it's a picture, it has pictures of hunky men doing housework and childcare, saying, oh, 3 hours are up. I want to hold on to her another little while, and things like that. Oh, I need to vacuum and get that last little spot, says this hunky
I
guy.
got to get this
No,
book and leave it out in the living room.
yeah, it's the Cambridge Women's Pornography Collective. And the reason they went to that is they found that women's excitement, sexual excitement, was greatly enhanced by watching men do housework. There are also studies that show that men who do housework have more sexual enthusiasm and more sex from their wives routinely. So, and those are quite established. But
So
what you
they can
have
do
is,
that for their own benefit. I
right,
want
they
them to
could,
do
but
it
it's
because
self
it's right,
interest.
not because they're going to get something from it, like sex.
Right. However, what it illustrates is that the expectations are on women to add to their domestic and childcare duties work outside the household. And it is impossible to really increase your salary if you don't go to the after work meetings, or you don't go to
Oh,
the conference, or you don't go for dinner with the person who could give you a promotion. And women are constantly held back which is why mothers make, on the average, 69% of what men earn, rather than 82% with single women. And so that you have a motherhood penalty as well as a gender penalty. And now during COVID, you have the withdrawal of public education as a right of Americans, which was hard fought. It had already been equal quality public education had been withdrawn. I should say that private educators report 100% attendance, unlike their public colleagues, and they have materials that are not tedious. Plus, they have video conferences with their teacher every day, or they're broken up into small pods of children who are attended to by their teacher every day. I looked up education, starting with preschool, in more enlightened countries like Denmark and like Norway. And Denmark has an incredible female leader, the youngest prime minister in the world, Mette Frederiksen. And
Excellent.
yes,
That's
and
good.
they and Sweden and Norway, the Scandinavian countries, do the same thing. Their kids have gone to school because they found it didn't increase the population of people smitten by COVID. If their kids were in school, they're in very small pods with a teacher, well spaced, outdoors whenever possible, and getting a full curriculum. And the government is paying the extra to make sure they're educated.
It's
Now,
something we could have
we're
done with
rich.
those malls that are closing down. Harriet, I hate to cut you off
Absolutely.
mid-thought, but we're at the end of our time. It's unfortunate because I feel like there's so much more that we could discuss here, but I do want to encourage everyone to go to Harriet Fraad's website, harrietfraad.com, Fraad, where you can find more of her work. I'm Juliana Forlano on Twitter at Juliana Forlano, and the Democracy at Work handle is democracy on Twitter is democracy at WRK. So it's work without the O. Harriet, your thoughts as we end?
Yes, that really people have to fight for public education all over again because it's being denied. And the pandemic is being, the result of the pandemic, without being a conspiracist, is that gender, class, and race divisions are getting bigger and more pernicious, deadly in the
And
United States.
if you're watching this and you need a solution, I know for me, one of the solutions that people have been coming up with is this idea of educational pods. And, there are homeschooling resources online for each state. They give you a curriculum if you're going to homeschool so that even I know the problem is like all the organization. Who has time to organize an educational pod and find 5 families that are going to be, you know, the same about how they feel about COVID? Are you going to go out without a mask? Are you going to stay home the whole time? Are you going to, you have to have an agreement around there. But one of the things that people I know have been doing is it's not perfect, but it does help because time is of the essence. Your kid is only going to be 6 for 1 year. And people have been organizing these pods for education where the parents are either hiring someone, which can be expensive, or they're taking on a subject matter of their own and rotating around each day. Again, it's not ideal. And if kids might have trouble going to a different house every day, that's a thing to consider. But I would look into it if you are struggling for a solution to this, even if that could be a little bit of help if you are unaware that was happening. I hope that was helpful.
Also, that there are these possibilities, not only the malls, the auditoriums, the empty restaurants, the empty stores. There's so many empties that could be places for small pods of children to learn as they do in private schools. And that should be done.
Thank you so much for listening. This is Capitalism Hits Home. I'm co-host Juliana Forlano. with co-host
And
Harriet Fraad, who I'm sure you all know. And the podcast has been made possible by Democracy at Work. Again, please support this project at patreon.com/Capitalism Hits Home, or visit us at democracyatwork.info. Thanks, Harriet.
thank you, Juliana, and thank you all for listening. And thank Brian Issam for doing all the tech.
And we'll be back next week. Please send money. All right, we'll talk to you next week.
Too.
Thanks, everybody.